You keep checking the empty corner of the room. Not for them, not anymore. It's for the confirmation that the corner is still empty, that the architecture of absence remains intact, verifiable. We tell ourselves that the goal of separation, of loss, is to stop looking, to move the eye away from the vacant space. But the retina holds the impression. It is less about the person and more about the light they cast on the self. And when they leave, the light meter inside you breaks. We call the feeling that lingers missing them. It's a linguistic simplification, a narrative shortcut we use to explain an internal catastrophe that is far more complex than simple sadness. It is not sadness. It is often the sustained terror of an identity crisis that you cannot articulate because the crisis is happening below the level of language. The real weight of persistence, the reason it never really goes away, is that it was never about external events. It was always about internal infrastructure. They didn't just occupy space in your life, they functioned as a load-bearing wall in the geometry of your self-perception, and when that wall is removed, you do not immediately collapse. No, that would be too clean. You simply begin to notice the subtle, unsettling way that the ceiling of your identity is now sagging, slightly. It's holding, yes, for now, but the integrity is gone. And you spend the next few years living under a structure you know is compromised, continually bracing yourself against a collapse that may never come, but whose possibility defines every movement you make. This is the gravitational pull of attachment dependency. It is the requirement for the other person to exist, not just as a distinct entity, but as the necessary frame against which your own significance was validated, reflected, and maintained. We learn early to outsource our validation. We learn that certain people hold the mirror steady, and when the mirror is gone, the reflection doesn't fade, it splinters, and you are left trying to reassemble your image from sharp, disparate fragments, hoping to find the sequence that makes you look cohesive again. This is why time, the great supposed healer, is often irrelevant to this particular persistence. Time heals flesh. Time does not necessarily reconstruct complex learned psychological dependencies. Instead, time simply moves the persistence from the explicit memory system, the narrative of what happened, into the implicit memory system, the body's knowledge, the habitual, autonomic response. The conscious thought of them might fade. The need for their regulatory presence does not. It just stops announcing itself with a loud, recognizable cry, and instead becomes a low, persistent hum in the background frequency of your being. A phantom limb is a perfect neurological model for deep emotional dependency. The limb is gone, the person is gone, but the neural pathways that used to carry the command, the signal that fired when you reached for them, when you anticipated their reaction, when you calibrated your mood based on their emotional state, those pathways are still fully wired, still expecting traffic. They haven't been demolished, they've merely been orphaned. And sometimes, maybe late at night, when the rest of your cognitive functioning quiets down, a stray signal wanders down that orphaned path, and you feel the instantaneous, searing pain of a hand that isn't there, gripping nothing. That pain is not history. It is purely, terrifyingly, present tense. It is the ghost habit. The ghost habit is what compels you, 4 years later, to almost text them when you achieve something monumental. Not because you consciously need their congratulations, but because the architecture of celebration, the final, crucial step in the recognition circuit, was historically routed through their specific point of confirmation. They were the final switch that turned the internal light from potential to validated. And now, when you achieve something, the circuit stalls. The power is there. The wire goes dead just before the bulb, and you stand in the strange, muted victory of the present, feeling the absence of the specific, learned reward mechanism. It is deeply unsettling to realize that the most persistent part of the connection is your own programmed response. That the attachment is now self-sustaining. It is running on stored kinetic energy, independent of the external stimulus. And this is where the conflict truly resides. We try to dismantle the attachment by focusing on the external facts. They are gone. The relationship ended. The history is written. We use logic against a system that operates entirely on wiring and chemistry. But the deeper, more dangerous persistence is the realization that removing them threatens your fluency with yourself. They taught you how to speak your own emotional language. They introduce complexity, depth, and nuance to your internal dialogue that you might not have accessed otherwise. And now that guide is missing. You can still read the language, yes, but the vocabulary feels diminished. Your own narrative voice sounds strangely flat, lacking the resonant complexity that their presence had provoked. And the fear arises, without the tension and counterpoint of that powerful attachment. Will I regress? Will I become less than the person I became while tethered to them? This is the core fear that binds the ghost. We cling to the pain because we secretly believe the pain is the last remaining evidence of the depth of the growth. We confuse intensity with relevance. We confuse suffering with proof of having lived profoundly. And so, to let go of the persistent ache feels like a profound betrayal of the evolution that attachment forced upon us. We must talk about the distinction between grief and residue. Grief is the emotional response to loss. It is painful, sharp, and it follows a recognizable trajectory. Residue is the subperceptual consequence of having two identities melt and solidify together. It is the leftover energy signature of emotional fusion. And residue doesn't heal, it transfers. It becomes integrated into the landscape of the self, like chemical runoff altering the soil composition permanently. Years pass, and you suddenly realize you adopted their mannerism when you are stressed, or you deploy their specific coping strategy when faced with bureaucratic frustration. These are not conscious acts of remembrance. These are the tiny, integrated pieces of their operating system that migrated into yours during the period of intensive co-creation. And you cannot excise them because they are now functioning parts of your stability. To remove them would require rebuilding your response mechanism from scratch. This realization brings a different kind of terror. That you are not merely a survivor of the relationship, but a hybrid entity. And that the persistence is not a matter of choice or willpower, but a consequence of the successful merging of behavioral code. Consider the concept of emotional debt. In deep attachment, particularly dependent ones, we often accrue psychological debt, unresolved issues, unsaid apologies, or crucial emotional transactions that were never completed. We assume that the other person holds the ledger. We believe that if they would just return or speak the right word, the debt would be cancelled and we could find peace. But the persistence happens because the debt isn't external. The ledger resides entirely within you, and the crucial truth is that you are the one holding yourself accountable for the failed resolution. It is the internal requirement for narrative neatness that keeps the engine running. The ego demands a coherent story. It demands that all major life chapters have a clear beginning, middle, and end, defined by some conclusive emotional statement. And when the end is messy, when the statement is ambiguous, the mind refuses to file the chapter away. It leaves it open, still flickering on the desktop, still demanding system resources, and we confuse the system lag with yearning. We interpret the mental effort required to maintain the unresolved file as the depth of our ongoing love or grief. It is neither. It is only the mind's relentless need for closure that it has failed to self-generate. If you want to understand why it stays, look at the triggers, not the memories. The triggers are the truth tellers. They are the small, accidental collisions with the present that yank you violently back into the past. A specific type of rain on the window, the smell of cheap gasoline, a cadence of speech from a stranger in a crowd. These triggers are not simply reminders of a shared moment. They are, more accurately, the keys that unlock a highly specific internal emotional state that was first generated and consistently reinforced within the context of that attachment. When the trigger fires, you don't just remember them, you instantly regenerate the emotional gravity you felt when you were with them. The vulnerability, the safety, the profound sense of being utterly known. That internal state, that specific flavor of consciousness, is addictive, and the only reliable way to taste it again is through the proxy of the attachment that first synthesized it. This is why persistence is not emotional failure. It's a neurological craving for a specific, self-defining chemical cocktail. And the craving doesn't go away until you successfully synthesize that cocktail on your own, independent of the external source, which requires finding new architecture for self-validation. And that requires true, frightening silence. We avoid the silence by intellectualizing the loss. We constantly run diagnostics on the relationship, analyzing the faults, assigning blame, rewriting the narrative to make it logically sustainable. But silence is the only environment where true integration can happen. Silence forces you to confront the ghost habit not as an emotional response, but as a lack of self-reliance. The attachment remains because it functioned as a psychological shortcut. They provided the answers to the questions you hadn't learned to ask yourself yet. They dictated the pace. They confirmed the reality. And now, when you face a moment of true ambiguity or existential doubt, your internal compass still instinctively points toward the last known regulator. There is a critical difference between missing the person and missing the security of their defining energy. The person is finite. The energy is not. The energy, the emotional force they used to exert upon your life, is merely displaced. It hasn't vanished. It is still orbiting the center of your universe, causing periodic, unexplained tidal forces. And the persistence is nothing more than your ongoing, involuntary commitment to tracking that displaced energy, measuring its effect on the present moment, waiting for the tides to subside. But the tides won't subside until you stop measuring them against the historical shoreline, until you agree to let the entire coastline change shape. And that is the core refusal that defines the persistence of deep attachment. We are unwilling to grant permission for our internal world to be radically redesigned without their input. We hold on to the framework of their influence because it feels like the last act of shared reality. We fear that if we fully dismantle the architectural reliance, if we truly become autonomous and self-contained, we will finally eradicate the last trace of the profound, transformative weight that relationship carried. We fear that successful self-sufficiency is the ultimate form of forgetting. And if we forget the texture of that dependency, we forget the complexity it imposed upon us. We hold the persistence like a watchman guarding a ruin. It never really goes away because the part of you that was built to depend on it is afraid to be truly alone with the blueprint of a new, potentially unshared identity. It stays because you haven't yet granted yourself permission to be fully, utterly unrecognizable to the ghost. And the ghost, in turn, needs you to stay recognizable, because its own existence is tethered to the familiar architecture of your internal,